Borkowsky is a certified dyslexia practitioner and the founder of High Five Literacy and Academic Coaching. Faith Borkowsky is a certified Wilson and IDA dyslexia practitioner, along with an Orton-Gillingham trained professional, and has extensive training and experience in a number of other research-based, peer-reviewed programs that have produced positive gains for students with dyslexia, auditory processing disorder, ADHD and ADD, and a host of other learning difficulties. She is also a New York State certified elementary education, special education, and reading teacher, honing her skills over the years and redefining strategies through trial and error. Faith has been a trainer in school districts across Long Island and has presented at literacy workshops and conferences for federal and state-funded initiatives. Her philosophy and practice include educating and empowering her students to be self-sufficient learners. Ms. Borkowsky works with all ages, preschoolers through adulthood, utilizing metacognitive strategies and multisensory instruction in a collaborative way. She is also the author of many books, one being Failing Students or Failing Schools, A Parent's Guide to Reading Instruction and Intervention. Faith Borkowsky is also the co-founder of Teach My Kid to Read, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on literacy. Without further ado, I would love to interview my guest, Faith Borkowsky. Hello and welcome back to Think Dyslexia Network. Faith, I am so excited to have you on the show. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Lauren, and I am a special educator and the founder of Think Dyslexia. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do. And share with anyone that you feel would find this interview or any other interviews helpful. So Faith, thank you so much for finding the time.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here, Dr. Lauren.
Definitely.
I was saying to you before, we haven't spoken, and this is such a great opportunity to get to know each other.
I absolutely agree, and I can't wait to delve into these questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline the questions so the audience kind of has an idea of where we're going. So the first question is really more about what inspired you in your professional career, because I know you've been in you've worn different hats. So what inspired you to write your book? The second question is focusing more on, I know you wrote a book that plays for the, it stands kind of for the mission for Teach My Kid to Read. So I definitely want to hear more about that. The third question for our audience out there who is not aware of Teach My Kid to Read, I'm really interested to hear more about this nonprofit organization. And then lastly, the question is focusing on your business, which is High Five Literacy and Academic Coaching. So let's get into our first question, Faith. So having been a classroom teacher, a reading specialist, a regional literacy coach, and an administrator, I'm curious, and I know the audience is as well, what position really inspired you to write Failing Students or Failing Schools, A Parent's Guide to Reading Instruction and Interventions?
So I would say the regional reading coach
Okay.
was really pivotal in getting me to get my thoughts down. The book actually came about first as a journal entry.
Oh, wow.
And so I would always get my thoughts down every day, how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, conversations I had. And going back years of journaling, I started to say, this is a book. And so my first go at writing this was my first book, actually, Behind School Walls, Intervention Behind School Walls, Why Your Child Continues to Struggle. And then Don Wynn, a publisher, picked up my book and decided that it would be better suited with more parent guidance. And I agreed. And so we kind of put our heads together and republished the book and made it even better. So the coaching position for sure opened my eyes to what goes on in classrooms. Because when you're a teacher, you only know what goes on in your room.
Your classroom, right?
I would always say it's like a women's penitentiary.
What?
It could be, cell block 1, cell block 4, cell block 8.
What an
You
interesting
really,
analogy.
you just know what's going on in your
For
little
space.
world.
Right.
And so I know what I was doing, and I assumed that everyone else did the same
Same
thing.
thing.
And what I realized as a coach is you could go in and see the same program, the same teacher's guide, the same demographics from one classroom to another. And you're going to see a completely
Right.
different situation depending upon how that teacher approaches the curriculum, the background of that teacher, the bias of the teacher.
Right.
There's a lot that goes into this. So even if you have an evidence-based program in place, it's all about implementation. It's all about fidelity, delivery, the knowledge of the teacher. So that position really was probably a pivotal point in my career.
Sounds like it. Definitely. No, and I think I want to touch on the point that you said, I thought everyone was doing what I was doing in the classroom. That's how I felt when I first started my career. I didn't know much. Actually, I really didn't know anything about dyslexia when I was in graduate school. And it wasn't until I started my career at a private dyslexic school where I was trained with an Orton-Gillingham fellow, went through the process of applying through the academy, and I was in an entire school where all of the teachers understood how, what dyslexia was, the multisensory approach, how to implement different accommodations. It wasn't until I left that bubble and went to public school that no one really understood what dyslexia was. And I was shocked, and I taught elementary school for 4 years. So I went to middle school and I said, oh, maybe it's just because I'm in middle school. But even talking to elementary school teachers in public school, it was eye-opening. So it's just interesting how you said, in your world, that's what you were doing and you assumed others were as well.
Well, let me take a step back. When I first started my career, I didn't know anything about dyslexia.
Right.
And my whole career was spent in the public schools. Okay. I
Okay.
did not work in a private school ever. I started teaching at 21 years old, really. And no, I didn't sub. I was
Oh,
just
wow. Just hit the ground running.
right in the classroom, full-time job, 21 years old. And I had a degree in elementary ed and special education. You would think somewhere along the way that I would have learned something. Then went for a master's in reading and still was not taught
Right.
anything about this. So all of it was by chance, quite honestly, that I picked up the right book. And it took many years of teaching incorrectly
Mm.
before I even learned about this. So, and interestingly enough, too, I started teaching in upper grades, intermediate grades, third, fourth, and fifth. So my first classroom was a third grade, and then I went to fourth and fifth, and then finally went down to first. And when I was in the upper grades, I was quite smug. I was like, what are they doing in those lower grades?
Right.
What's going on? I
Right.
really thought there was something wrong with, first grade teachers, kindergarten, second. What's happening that these kids are coming up and they can't read? Because by that point, I expected to have kids who could at least decode
Right.
and that we could have these rich conversations about books. By that point, you would think they all were taught how to read.
Sure. Sure.
And I was young and I didn't have
No, yeah.
children of my own.
Right.
So I thought also, what's wrong with these parents?
Right.
But it's true.
These
I'm being
valid,
honest.
yes, yes.
I'm being honest. Something wrong with the parents. Something has to be wrong with those teachers in the lower grades,
Right.
because I just knew how hard I worked in
Sure.
my little classroom. Well, it was quite eye-opening to go down to first grade and to see how reading was taught in first grade. And it just didn't make sense to me. Nothing made sense. My master's program, pulling kids out of the classroom, being a first grade teacher. And at the time, there was no internet really to get answers.
Sure.
I started teaching in 1986. So
Okay.
you have to realize that even when the computer started to come around, I wasn't even using it. It wasn't a big deal in my world.
Sure.
And very few people did unless you were into this. And, you know, it was a completely different situation. So the only place I was able to get information was from the library or a bookstore.
Okay.
And then this book that happened to fall into my lap, quite literally fell off the shelf. I always think that wasn't by chance, that wasn't a coincidence.
Divine intervention.
I believe in that it just happened to be. And I started to kind of thumb through it. I said, I have to buy this book. And it was a book by Diane McGinnis. And it was called Why Children Can't Read and What You Can Do About It. And that book truly changed my life. So it was obviously the position coaching, but that came after I
Right.
read that book. And from that point on, I started to realize what true explicit teaching means. I started to go for training. This wasn't a part of anything I did in
Anything.
school.
Right.
Came with
That
degrees and nothing, you
That's
know?
definitely a systemic issue for sure.
Yeah.
So I actually want to transition to another question, and this leads me to more about Teach My Kid to Read.
Yeah.
Can you share with our audience what this nonprofit's mission, vision, how maybe they can benefit from this nonprofit organization? And I know one of your books connects to the mission. Can you
Yeah.
speak on that?
Sure, sure. So I did not start Teach My Kid to Read.
Okay.
The person who is the founder, her name is Marion Waldman, and she started it because she started to look for answers for her daughter
Okay.
and couldn't find anything. And she kept getting moved around from person to person. Her daughter was just not doing well. And then finally, she sent her to a summer camp where
Mhm.
they specialized in the Orton-Gillingham approach. And
Okay.
in one summer, her child went
Through.
up, I think, 2 or 3 levels or something like that in her reading.
Wow.
And she thought this was insane that that she had to pay so much money
Yes.
to find answers in a summer camp program. In one
Right.
summer, they were able to do what the school couldn't do
In a
in
year.
years.
Yes.
And of course, I, on the other hand, was actually fighting the same fight as a person in the profession. And we found each other through social media.
Of course.
And I said, I think I can help you here. And she was looking to kind of do work with the universities
Mhm.
and government and the political realm. And we still are interested in that. Don't get me wrong. We're interested in going through the front door whenever we can with schools.
Right.
But from my experience, I said, we need to try something different because I've been at this for many years and it's a slow go in the public schools.
Yes.
So my whole approach is really backdoor. It's a
Okay.
backdoor approach. And that is to get the parents knowledgeable, because the parents are really the true drivers of change. From what I
I
see,
agree.
that, when you go through the front door, and I did as a coach, if you read Failing Students or Failing Schools, it's part memoir, right, of my experiences and how I was part of a grant called Reading First, trying to make change with schools. I was doing embedded professional development, pushing into classrooms, working with building coaches, working with administrators, and we made a dent. But you have to understand that every time we moved up a little bit, we moved 10 steps back. And in public schools, there's a lot of change. So if you work with a leader who gets it, all of a sudden that person moves on,
Mhm.
and then you're back at square one, and they bring back what's comfortable for them.
Right, right.
So it's kind of like being on this hamster wheel, like,
Sure.
oh, going in circles. So I said, we need to get into the community. We need to really get to the people who need to hear this message. So my hope is that Teach My Kid to Read reaches the people who need to hear it the most early on, before their kids start school,
School
which
age, right?
brings me to this book. So this book came after Failing Students or Failing Schools. So this was actually the second book, but it's a republished book of
Okay.
my first. And this is mostly for parents who are already in the system.
Sure.
This one is really meant to be read before kids get into the school system, so that parents can be aware. It's called If Only I Would Have Known, and you could see that in quotes for a reason,
Right.
because this is what I heard all the time.
If only I knew this, then I would have
Yeah,
done that. Absolutely.
exactly. And it was said in this way: if only I would have known.
Like
I
regretful,
Yeah,
regretful, guilt-ridden.
exactly. Regret,
Mhm.
feeling self blame, hatred.
Yes,
Why, how did I miss this?
exactly. I was gonna say, how did I miss that? I've heard that before.
Exactly. And I would say, no, it's not your fault.
Right.
Of course, you're trusting professionals. What
Exactly.
other profession do you not trust? Doctors, lawyers. You go to the professional. So I wrote this book actually from true conversations
With
I
parents.
had with parents, and what I know also,
Mhm.
and what the information I would like to impart through a play with this fictitious family,
Oh, that's great.
going for advice first with a pediatrician. That's actually book one. This
Yes.
is a 3-in-1.
I see.
And
Yes, yes.
yeah, the first one is a conversation with the pediatrician. The second one is with a preschool teacher,
Okay.
or you could fill in daycare
Take care.
provider. It's just that person you go to before school actually starts your kindergarten experience, and then librarian, because they are, a resource in the community.
We really are.
And
Absolutely.
and they should be aware of how reading develops. Most of them are still under the assumption that reading develops by being surrounded by good books and read alouds. And we're trying to change that. And we're working with library systems. We're trying to get that message across. We're trying to alert pediatricians that they should at least be having this conversation with parents,
Absolutely.
not necessarily diagnosing dyslexia,
Starting that conversation.
starting the conversation. And then daycare and preschool should be aware that you know what? There are better ways to get children prepared than what you think. What's
Right.
happening now in daycare and preschool is they're bringing the curriculum down to that level and trying to make it more like kindergarten and first grade, heaven forbid, where it's a lot of sight words and trying to do just what they're doing in kindergarten and first grade. So we're trying to push change in the other direction
Sure.
through the community and to alert people about what reading is, what dyslexia is, and the whole process. And my book is being used as part of our Teach My Kid to Read mission. Correct.
That's Thank you so much for explaining that. And for the audience that's viewing, the link for Teach My Kid to Read will be in the show notes. So you can take a look. You can, Marion, you can kind of see her story. You can also learn about Faith and what the organization does. So thank you so much for explaining that in great detail. So
Sure.
our interview is coming to an end, unfortunately, but before we leave, I want to hear more about high five literacy. I was going to say learning, high five literacy and academic coaching. Can you share what would be the elevator pitch if someone said, Faith, what do I need to know about high five literacy? What would you say?
Well, I talk about the one trick pony in my book, and I've written about that, where people hire tutors who are trained in one thing.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like got to make the donuts. And I think what I bring to the table and my philosophy is taking the process of reading as a knowledge base and using the best of the best. And that it's not just about a program, it's a process and it's a partnership with families. That one person alone can't do this.
Right.
It's, alone we could do so little, together we could do so much. That's
Right.
Helen Keller, and that is on my website because I think that if you want to talk about an elevator pitch, it's a partnership. And once kids feel that partnership, they feel loved, they feel supported, they feel that they're not in this alone.
Mhm.
And you're with them and they could trust you and that there's something different, we start to see progress rather quickly.
I think that that's excellent. And if you are not familiar, as I said before, with Teach My Kid How to Read, Faith's link will be in the show notes as well. So I'm just curious to know, before we end this interview, is it tutoring or what
Oh,
exactly is it? I assume it's not just you, or is it just you for the organization?
so I basically do it myself.
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
do it all myself. And I do professional development, I do tutoring, and I do it all myself. And then when I do talk to other people, I bring other people in, it's for a particular purpose. I
Sure.
kind of know who my go to people are for different um, issues. And
Right.
I've built a nice group of people I can trust in this.
Right.
But basically, as far as professional development goes, and if I'm doing the one on one tutoring, it's me. But I also do consultations
Okay.
because I feel that's a missing piece. Parents can
Absolutely.
do a lot of this themselves with guidance. So I actually train parents who cannot afford weekly tutoring,
Uh-huh.
but need some help to get started,
Got it. Right. Right.
can do this. And I encourage parents to get involved. And there are people who are do it yourselfers. So I've worked with homeschoolers, I've worked with parents who do more after school and try to be intimately involved with the process. Yeah, and all my tutoring students, I always get there's somebody on the other end who will be guiding the practice during the week.
Wow. So I really want to thank you, Faith, for sharing your time with me this afternoon with our audience and also your expertise. So for our audience, please, please, please check the show notes. There are going to be a lot of links down there: Faith's book, Teach My Kid to Read, and High Five Literacy. So you have all of the resources to reach out and to learn more. So Faith, thank you so much for coming on Think Dyslexia Network. And I hope that we could maybe do a part 2, because this was so much great information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. You too. So.